Most people think they understand how world politics works. Leaders shake hands, sign papers, give speeches. But that's just what you see on TV. The real business happens in rooms you never hear about, through messages that never make the news. What I'm going to tell you today will change how you see America's relationship with India forever. Here's the thing about power. Real power doesn't announce itself. It moves quietly. It works through people who know how to keep secrets. And when something big happens, most of the world finds out months later, sometimes years later. You've probably watched diplomatic meetings on the news. Everyone sitting around fancy tables, flags behind them, cameras flashing, reporters asking questions. It all looks very official, very structured, very predictable. But that's not where the important decisions get made. That's just the performance. The real work happens away from all the cameras and microphones, in private conversations between people who understand that some things are too important to discuss in public. Think about it this way. When you have something really important to tell someone, do you announce it to the whole world first? Do you put it on social media for everyone to see? Of course not. You find a private moment. You pick the right person. You choose your words carefully. World leaders do the same thing, except when they do it, the consequences affect millions of people, entire countries, sometimes the entire world. During Trump's presidency, something happened that nobody expected. Not the media, not other world leaders, not even most people in the American government. Trump sent a private message to India. But this wasn't just any message. This was the kind of communication that changes everything. Picture this moment. Trump sitting in the Oval Office, maybe late at night when the White House is quiet. He's thinking about the challenges facing America, China getting stronger every day, Russia causing problems around the world, Europe unable to make tough decisions. He realizes something that most politicians never want to admit. America can't handle everything alone anymore. The world has changed. Other countries have gotten stronger, and trying to control everything from Washington just isn't going to work. So he makes a decision that goes against decades of American foreign policy tradition. Instead of trying to manage India like a junior partner, he's going to treat them as an equal, a true partner in shaping the future. But here's the problem. How do you communicate something that's sensitive? How do you reach out to another country's leadership without creating a media storm? Without political opponents twisting your words? Without other countries misunderstanding your intentions? You do it privately, carefully, through people who understand the stakes. And the way India handled it shocked everyone. Let me explain what really happened and why it matters more than anything you've seen in the news lately. You see, diplomacy has two faces. There's the public face, photo opportunities, press conferences, formal meetings with flags and handshakes. Everyone sees this. Everyone talks about it, but it's mostly theater. Then there's the private face. Secret communications, back-channel conversations, messages sent through trusted people to avoid public attention. This is where the real decisions get made. This is where the future gets shaped. Trump understood this better than most politicians. He knew that sometimes you need to talk directly to people without all the noise, without reporters asking questions, without political opponents trying to twist your words. So when he had something important to tell India, he didn't use normal channels. He didn't go through the State Department. He didn't send an official letter. Instead, he chose a different path, a more direct path. He sent a private message straight to Dr. S. Jaishankar. Now, why Jaishankar? Why not Prime Minister Modi? Why not through the usual diplomatic routes? The answer tells you everything about how serious this message was. First, understand who Jaishankar is. This isn't some political appointee who got the job because he knew the right people. This guy is a professional diplomat. Been doing this for almost 40 years. He started at the bottom and worked his way up through every level of India's foreign service. He's been posted in some of the world's most challenging locations. Moscow during the final years of the Soviet Union. Washington during multiple presidential transitions. Prague as communism collapsed in Eastern Europe. Singapore as Asia began its economic rise. Each of these assignments taught him something different about how the world really works. In Moscow, he learned how authoritarian systems make decisions. In Washington, he saw how democracy and bureaucracy can both help and hurt foreign policy. In Prague, he witnessed how quickly political systems can change. In Singapore, he understood how small countries can have big influence. But here's what makes him special in the world of diplomacy. He has this ability to listen to what people are really saying, not just the words they use. In diplomatic conversations, the most important information often comes through tone, timing, and what's not said rather than what is said. Jaishankar has mastered this skill better than almost anyone in international politics today. He can sit in a meeting with world leaders and understand not just their official positions, but their real concerns, their actual limitations, and their genuine intentions. More importantly, he knows how to handle sensitive information. In almost 4 decades of diplomatic service, he's never leaked classified information to the press. Never used private conversations for personal political gain. Never betrayed the confidence of foreign leaders who trusted him with their secrets. This reputation didn't happen by accident. It was built through years of proving that he could be trusted with the most sensitive information. That's why everyone from Putin to Xi Jinping to European leaders respect him, not because they agree with his positions, but because they trust him to keep his word. And in international politics, trust is everything. So Trump's message went directly to Jaishankar through unofficial channels. No paper trail, no government bureaucracy, no politicians trying to score points. Just one leader communicating directly with another through the one person who could handle it properly. But what was in this message? What could be so important that it required this level of secrecy? Here's what we know. This wasn't about trade agreements or military deals. Those things get handled through normal government channels. This was about something much bigger, something that could change the balance of power across the entire world. To understand what Trump was really thinking, you need to look at what was happening globally at that time. China wasn't just growing economically anymore. They were becoming militarily aggressive, building artificial islands in the South China Sea, claiming territory that belonged to other countries, making it clear they wanted to control all the major trade routes in Asia. But it wasn't just military expansion. China was using economic pressure too, threatening countries that disagreed with their policies, cutting off trade relationships when other governments criticized Chinese actions, using their huge market as a weapon to force other nations into compliance. At the same time, Russia was causing problems on multiple fronts, interfering in democratic elections around the world, invading neighbors like Ukraine, using energy supplies as political weapons against European countries, testing how far they could push before someone pushed back. Meanwhile, traditional American allies in Europe were struggling to respond effectively to these challenges. Some countries were too dependent on Russian energy to take strong positions. Others were too invested in Chinese markets to risk economic retaliation. Many were simply overwhelmed by their own internal political problems. Trump looked at this situation and realized something that many American leaders before him had refused to acknowledge. The world had fundamentally changed. America couldn't single-handedly manage every global challenge anymore, not because America had gotten weaker, but because other countries had gotten much stronger. For decades, American foreign policy had been based on the idea that Washington could set the rules and other countries would follow them, but that model wasn't working anymore. China and Russia were openly challenging American leadership. Even allies were starting to question whether American approaches were still effective. So Trump started thinking about a different strategy. Instead of trying to control everything from Washington, what if America found strong partners who shared similar values and could help share the burden of global leadership? That's where India came into the picture, not as a country that America could control or direct, but as a genuine partner with its own strengths and capabilities. So he reached out to India, not as a boss talking to an employee, but as one major power talking to another, as someone who understood that both countries needed each other. The message was clear and direct. America recognized India as an equal. Our partner, not a junior ally, not a regional power, but a global force that could help shape the future of the world. Think about how revolutionary this was. For most of its history as an independent nation, India had been treated by superpowers as either a country to be influenced or a market to be accessed. The Soviet Union tried to make India a client state during the Cold War. China alternated between friendship and hostility depending on their own strategic needs. Even friendly countries like Britain and France saw India primarily as an economic opportunity. But Trump was offering something completely different, true partnership between equals, recognition that India had legitimate interests that extended far beyond South Asia, acknowledgement that India's voice deserved equal weight in global decisions. This wasn't just diplomatic courtesy, this was a fundamental shift in how America viewed the world. Instead of seeing international relations as a pyramid with America at the top, Trump was proposing a model based on cooperation between major powers who shared similar values. For India, this offer was both exciting and challenging. Exciting because it meant global recognition of their growing power and influence. Challenging because it also meant taking on global responsibilities that India had never had to handle before. Think about India's position at that time. They were already dealing with complex relationships with China and Pakistan. They had their own internal development challenges, poverty, infrastructure, education, healthcare. Taking on global responsibilities would require resources and attention that were already stretched thin. But the opportunity was too important to pass up. If India wanted to be treated as a major power, they had to be willing to act like one. That meant thinking beyond regional issues and taking positions on global challenges. The message from Trump was essentially an invitation to join the top table of world leadership, but it came with expectations. If India wanted equal treatment, they would need to contribute equally to solving global problems. And here's where the story gets really interesting. Instead of keeping this message completely secret, Jaishankar did something unexpected, something that caught everyone off guard. At a major international conference with reporters and analysts watching from all over the world, he made a statement that seemed routine on the surface. He was talking about India's foreign policy, standard diplomatic language, the kind of speech every foreign minister gives at these events. But Jaishankar is too smart and too experienced to waste an opportunity like this. He knew that every word would be analyzed by intelligence agencies around the world. Every phrase would be studied for hidden meanings. Every pause would be interpreted as significant. So he crafted his statement very carefully. To most people watching, it would sound like typical diplomatic talk, boring, predictable, the kind of thing that usually gets ignored by the media. But hidden in that speech were specific words, careful phrases, references that anyone who understood diplomatic code would recognize immediately. He talked about new levels of strategic cooperation with America. In diplomatic language, the word strategic doesn't just mean important. It means military and security cooperation. It means sharing intelligence. It means coordinating responses to threats. He mentioned shared values and common interests multiple times. Again, this might sound like empty phrase to regular people, but in diplomatic circles, when a foreign minister emphasizes shared values, he's signaling that his country sees itself as part of the same team as the other country. Most importantly, he used the phrase mutual recognition of each other's global responsibilities. This was the key signal. He was telling the world that America and India had acknowledged each other as global powers with equal status. To anyone who wasn't trained in diplomatic language, this sounded like routine international cooperation talk. But to the people who mattered, intelligence analysts, foreign policy experts, otherworldly others, the message was crystal clear. Something significant had happened behind the scenes. India and America had reached a new understanding that went far beyond anything the public knew about. The reaction was immediate and intense. In Washington, phones started ringing within hours of Jaishankar's speech. Government officials who hadn't been part of the private communication suddenly realized they had missed something big. Intelligence analysts were pulling up transcripts of the speech, going through every sentence word by word. Some officials were angry that they had been left out of such an important communication. In Washington, information is power, and being excluded from major decisions is seen as a career threat. Bureaucrats who had spent years building relationships with Indian officials suddenly felt sidelined. Others were impressed that India had managed the situation so skillfully. Here was a foreign minister who could take sensitive information and use it strategically without betraying any confidences. That's a rare skill in international politics, and experienced diplomats recognized it immediately. The media reaction was intense but confused. Reporters knew something important had happened, but they couldn't figure out exactly what. Headlines appeared asking, "What does India know that we don't?" Television analysts spent hours trying to decode Jaishankar's diplomatic language. Cable news programs brought in former diplomats and foreign policy experts to explain what the speech really meant. Some got it right, others completely missed the point. But all the attention meant that more people were paying attention to US-India relations than had in years. Social media exploded with speculation. Foreign policy Twitter accounts started sharing theories about what kind of secret agreement might have been reached. Think tanks rushed to publish analysis pieces trying to explain the implications. But the most important reactions came from other world capitals, because they understood that this wasn't just about America and India anymore. This was about the entire global balance of power. In Beijing, Chinese leaders suddenly realized they had a much bigger problem than they thought. For years, Chinese strategic planners had assumed India would remain focused on regional issues, border disputes with Pakistan and China, economic development challenges, internal political management. This assumption was built into all of China's long-term planning. They figured that as long as India was dealing with poverty, infrastructure problems, and regional security challenges, they wouldn't have the resources or attention to challenge Chinese ambitions globally. But Jaishankar's statement made it clear that this assumption was completely wrong. India wasn't just thinking regionally anymore. They were thinking globally about the entire Indo-Pacific region, about Africa, where China had been investing heavily, about global trade routes that China wanted to control. And now India had America as a true partner, not just in trade or technology, but in strategic planning at the highest levels. This changed everything for China's leadership. They had been planning their global expansion based on the idea that they would only face serious opposition from America and maybe Russia in some areas. Now they realized they might be facing a coordinated response from the world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy working together. The Chinese immediately started reaching out to other countries in the region, trying to build their own partnerships, offering economic incentives to countries that might be tempted to join an American-Indian alliance, threatening consequences for countries that move too close to the new partnership. But they also started preparing for a different kind of competition, one where they couldn't assume they would be facing isolated opponents, one where they might be dealing with coordinated strategies from multiple major powers. In Moscow, Putin's government had its own set of concerns. Russia had spent decades carefully building a relationship with India that served Russian strategic interests. They sold advanced weapon systems to India, shared military technology, created economic ties that gave Moscow significant influence in New Delhi. This relationship was one of Russia's most important geopolitical assets. It allowed them to maintain influence in South Asia, even as their global power declined in other areas. It provided a crucial source of revenue from arms sales, and it gave them a potential partner in balancing against Chinese power when necessary. But if India was moving significantly closer to America, that entire relationship would need to be reconsidered. Russian officials understood that countries couldn't maintain equally close strategic partnerships with both America and Russia. At some point, India would have to choose. Russian intelligence agencies started analyzing every aspect of India's recent foreign policy moves, looking for signs of how far the new American partnership might go, trying to understand whether this was a temporary tactical adjustment or a fundamental strategic realignment. Putin himself reportedly made several calls to Indian officials in the weeks following Jaishankar's speech. These weren't routine diplomatic conversations. They were careful probing sessions designed to test how much Russia's relationship with India might be changing. The Russians also started reaching out to other countries in the region, Pakistan obviously, but also smaller nations that might be concerned about growing American-Indian cooperation. They offered military equipment, economic assistance, and political support to anyone willing to balance against the new partnership. This is how real diplomacy works, not through public announcements or social media posts, but through careful private communications between people who understand the stakes. Trump's message to Jaishankar wasn't just about immediate policy issues. It was about recognizing a fundamental shift in global power. America accepting that it needed strong partners, not just followers. India demonstrating that it was ready to take on global responsibilities. And the way both sides handled it showed the world that a new era had begun. An era where power is shared between equals rather than concentrated in one capital. The shockwaves from this private message are still being felt today. Every major country has had to adjust its strategies. Every international organization has had to recognize new realities. Because when two of the world's largest democracies decide to work together as true partners, everything changes. Trade patterns shift. Military balances alter. Economic opportunities multiply. But most importantly, the message itself becomes less important than what it represents. A new model for how major powers can cooperate in a complex, dangerous world. That's the real story here. Not just what Trump said to Jaishankar, but what their communication method revealed about the future of international relations. Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones nobody else hears. And sometimes the biggest changes start with a single message sent through the right person at exactly the right moment. This was one of those moments, and the world is still adjusting to what it means.